Here are 3 reasons to avoid this one rotator cuff exercise. Now I'm talking about rotator cuff rotation exercises. That's where you're doing this motion and you usually will have a rubber band pulling this way, you're pulling out this way, or the rubber band's going outwards that way and your hand's coming towards your body. Or sometimes it's a cable machine with a handle attached to the cable and weights hanging on the other end of the cable and you're pulling against the resistance from the cable. Another version of this same exercise is your arms in this position and you're rotating with the resistance pulling you backwards that way, so you're rotating down in this direction, or you're rotating away in this direction with the cable or rubber band in front of you. All of these exercises have the intent of strengthening your rotator cuff muscles, and they're usually used in the treatment of a rotator cuff tear or in the rehabilitation after having had a rotator cuff tendon repair surgery. Here's reason number 1. This exercise, this rotation exercise, makes the rotator cuff muscles work in a way that they are not designed to work. This exercise is unusual on so many levels because if you think about it, how often in your life are you rotating your body this way, your shoulder this way, or this way against resistance? Really the only time that you move in those directions, with the exception of maybe arm wrestling, is when you have to reach around your body to get behind your back, to scratch an itch, to take clothing off and on. If you have to reach in an awkward direction, but you don't do it on a consistent basis, it's quite rare. So that means that those muscles only need as much strength as necessary to get to your end ranges, but you don't usually need a lot of extra force to get there just to get to the end range of what your shoulder joint can do. That means that working out this motion in an isolated way, isolated rotation, is just not a natural thing for your shoulder. If you look at the rotator cuff muscles, this is a shoulder blade with all the rotator cuff muscles on it, the red stuff. And then the muscles turn into tendons, the white things out here, and they attach to the upper arm bone. And the theory with these exercises is that the rotator cuff muscles, it's a misnomer, in other words, it's named incorrectly. The theory is that they do rotation, but their primary action, the main reason for the muscle, what it's designed to do, all these rotator cuff muscles around the shoulder blade, is to pull the ball into the socket joint to create stability. And if you look at all the anatomy books about what the action of all the rotator cuff muscles is, the shared common action is it pulls the ball into the socket. You'll see that it pulls the head of the humerus, that's the ball, against the glenoid of the scapula, that's the socket. That's the main action that all these muscles share. Secondary action is rotation and abduction, all the other muscles that move the ball in all the different directions. But those are secondary. And the reason why they're secondary is because there are other muscles, other bigger muscles around this that are the primary movers. So you're talking about like the deltoids, the muscle that you see on the outside that makes kind of the shape of the shoulder out here. You have the pectoral muscles on the front that influence rotation and movement in this direction. And then you have the latissimus muscle, which is the lats for short, the one that's back here. It comes up and attaches to the front of the shoulder and can help you reach backwards in those big motions. All those other big muscles are designed to do all the main movements of the shoulder with the resistance. That's what gives you the force whenever you're picking up something, pushing or pulling something. But these itty bitty rotator cuff muscles are not designed to do that. Those pec muscles, the lat muscles, those are huge muscles relative to these. What would be a better idea than working out rotation like this whenever you're doing rotator cuff rehabilitation is to exercise the rotator cuff muscles in a way where they're creating stability. So that means moving the shoulder blades properly whenever you're reaching. In other words, if you're pushing forward like this, what you should be doing is pushing your shoulder blades forward, because that's gonna put your shoulder blade in this position, which moves the socket forward and puts those rotator cuff muscles in a better position to stabilize the ball against the socket. If you don't push that shoulder blade forward and it stays in this position as you're reaching forward, as many people do when they're training for, like, say, a bench press, they'll say, pin your shoulder blades down, then push the weights up. Then you're holding the shoulder blade in position and forcing that ball and socket joint move into an extreme position that it's not supposed to go into. But if you can get that shoulder blade to move forward and the socket to move forward, then the rotator cuff muscle has a chance to do what it's best designed to do. Now, the second reason is that strengthening the rotator cuff muscles like this feeds into the imbalance that leads to rotator cuff tears. Now, this is especially disconcerting, in my opinion, for those that have had a rotator cuff repair surgery already, because they already had the tear, they went through the surgery, and now they're doing an exercise that's going to potentially make them tear it all over again and undo the whole surgery. I wouldn't want to be doing that. But the reason why this happens is because if you're doing this exercise to strengthen the rotator cuff muscles, you're potentially getting more strength in the rotator cuff muscles. You're strengthening all these red things. And theoretically, you should be strengthening the tendons as well, because tendons should get strong in proportion to the muscles that they attach to support the forces that you're putting through them. However, if you're not using those big muscles appropriately, like I gave you in that example where you're pushing, then you're going to be putting extra strain on the rotator cuff tendons, and it's going to lead to another potential tear. This is why so many people, I see them here in my clinic, that have had rotator cuff tendon repair surgeries end up with continued shoulder pain even after the rotator cuff tear has already been repaired surgically. It's because the root of the problem has not been addressed, and because this exercise doesn't address the root of the problem. In fact, it feeds into it. Which leads to my third point. In point number 2, we're feeding into the imbalance. Point number 3 is you're adding more tension to the tendons, which is going to set you up for another tear or your first tear. Some people think that they're getting a rotator cuff tear. Maybe they have something like shoulder impingement, which is the stage for setting up a rotator cuff tear. And so if you go do this exercise, you're actually just adding more tension to the tendon and progressing a rotator cuff tear. But like I said earlier, because I get this argument always from healthcare professionals is, well, we're strengthening the muscle, we're strengthening the tendon, so it should theoretically be strong enough to take the forces you're putting through it. But here is the thing that I always pin them on. You're training the rotator cuff muscle to become predominantly a rotator muscle, when that's not its predominant function in the body. It's designed for stability, to pull the ball against the socket. And if you're doing a lot of this exercise with resistance, then what you're doing is you're causing the nervous system to rewire itself to primarily use the rotator cuff muscles for all these big motions that they're not designed to do. Over time, you're going to be overusing the rotator cuff muscles and tendons, and that's going to lead to a tear. So it's training the wrong activity. But if instead we train how to use the shoulder blades properly to take tension off the tendons and make those big muscles work the way they're supposed to, that allows the rotator cuff muscles to work the way they're supposed to as well, then we have happy shoulders. So we don't want to add more tension to the rotator cuff tendons than what they're designed to take. Remember, they're tiny muscles. You can't see the big pec muscles, but that if this is my shoulder blade, my pec muscle starts here on my sternum, crosses over and covers that. And then the lat muscle is even bigger. It starts in my low back, wraps it, fans out, and it goes up into the shoulder. These are huge muscles. The trapezius muscle affects the position of the shoulder blade. It's an enormous muscle compared to these little tiny rotator cuff muscles that are designed for stability, not for big movements. Hey, if you're suffering from a rotator cuff tear, a suspected tear, or you've had a surgery to repair the tear, but your shoulder's still hurting, then I've got a program for you that's going to help solve the root cause of this problem. It's called the Rotator Cuff Tear Recovery Program, and the program is my comprehensive treatment approach to resolving the root cause, the muscle imbalance that puts too much tension through these rotator cuff tendons. You can learn more about that program through the link in the description below, and I've also got a playlist of all our rotator cuff help videos. You'll find that next to that other link down in the description as well. Hey, if this video was helpful for you, please give us a thumbs up. Please share this with somebody you think needs to hear this. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell, and please drop a comment. We love getting back to our comments here on YouTube. Let us know if you've had a rotator cuff problem in the past, how it got better or how it's not better. Please let us help point you in the right direction. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.